The Law of One, session 17. This one is about the fourth density, the harvest, and Jesus. So jumping right in. It starts with Ra making a correction on a previous session, which was session 14, and that was from the years 2300 and 2600, changing them to 3300 and 3600. And then he goes on to state that he has difficulty with our time-space, and that's why sometimes they get the numbers and whatnot wrong, or the years wrong. I have already corrected these years in the actual recordings. Oh, by the way, it's 2,300 or 3,300 years ago, and 2,600 or 3,600 years ago. So the questioner. First, we are now in the fourth density. Will the effects of the fourth density increase in the next 30 years? Will we see more changes in our environment and our effect upon our environment? Ra says, the fourth density is a vibrational spectrum. Your time-space continuum has spiraled your planet and your solar system into this vibration. This transition involves the realignment of the Earth's electromagnetic energy centers to properly receive and integrate the new cosmic energies associated with the fourth density. Are you following? As a result, the Earth will become aligned or magnetized to the fourth density, facilitating a new state of being and consciousness for the planet and its inhabitants. This is going to occur with some inconvenience, as we have said before. As the Earth transitions into the fourth density, it will experience significant physical and energetic adjustments. The collective thoughts and emotions of humanity are contributing to these disturbances of the Earth's energy patterns, which increase disorder and generate unusable heat, which will lead to physical ruptures of the Earth's surface as it reconfigures itself to align with the new fourth density vibrations. I imagine this means volcanoes. Despite these changes, the process is necessary for the Earth to properly integrate and become magnetized to the fourth density. I've heard from many, I can't remember if I've mentioned this in a previous session, but that over the next 7 years now, because this was 3 years ago that I'd heard 10 years, that there will be many deaths or souls leaving the planet over this period of realignment, shall we say. Moving on, you will find a sharp increase in the number of people whose vibrational potentials include the potential for fourth vibrational distortions. Thus, there will seem to be a new breed. These are those incarnating for fourth density work. It's interesting. There will also be a sharp increase in the short run of negatively oriented people and social complexes due to the polarizing conditions of the clear boundaries between fourth density characteristics and third density self-service orientation. I think this is also a common narrative going around about how the negative polarity will seem to gain a stronger hold before it kind of dies off. So I guess, not only through access to information and technology does it seem like things are getting worse, but potentially also because they are. Almost like if you pour hot water into an ant's nest. I've never done this, and I wouldn't advise it, that you can imagine that you'll probably have a whole lot of ants coming running out. So I kind of have that image in my mind, is that as things are being purified, it's like all the negative stuff is coming to the surface rapidly. So it just seems like a lot more. But it's only because it's becoming more visible. Those who remain in fourth density upon this plane will be for the positive orientation. So anybody who stays will be positive. Many will come from elsewhere, I guess around the universe, not just the galaxy. For it would appear that with all of the best efforts of the Confederation, which includes those of your people's inner planes, inner civilizations, and those from other dimensions, the harvest will still be much less than what this planet is capable of comfortably supporting in service. The questioner: is it possible to help an entity reach fourth density level in these last days? Ra: it is possible to help another being directly. Sorry, it is impossible to help another being directly. It is only possible to make catalyst available in whatever form. The most important being the radiation of realization of oneness with the Creator from the Self. Less important being this information. So in other words, don't bother too much about this text. What you really want to do is, in whatever way, catalyze people, maybe through inspiration. I wouldn't say, harm people, but in my case, my catalysts have always felt harmful first, and then I see later that, that was the purpose for that seemingly bad thing happening. So I guess, but it's also happened through inspiration, through somebody speaking about something, planting a seed, and my curiosity kind of peaking, just hearing their stories, which I guess is also the reason that I share any of my own experiences, is because when I listen to other people's experiences, it's fascinating. It kind of wakes up this curiosity. And so listening to these stories of others has been a great catalyst for me too. Continuing, we ourselves do not feel an urgency for this information to be widely disseminated. It is enough that we have made it available to 3, 4, or 5. This is extremely ample reward. For if one of these obtains fourth density understanding due to this catalyst, then we shall have fulfilled the law of one in the distortion of service. I guess this is catalyst right now that you're listening to as well, and that I'm reading. We encourage you to not try to get this to as many people as possible. The fact that you attempt to make this information available is, in your term, your service. The attempt, if it reaches one, reaches all. We cannot offer shortcuts to enlightenment. Enlightenment is of the moment, an opening to intelligent infinity. It can only be accomplished by the self, for the self. Another self cannot teach, learn enlightenment, but only teach, learn information, inspiration, or sharing of love, of mystery, of the unknown that makes the other self reach out and begin the seeking process that ends in a moment. But who can know when an entity will open the gate to the present? The questioner. In meditation a few nights ago, I had the impression of a question about a crater in Russia. I believe it was in Tunguska? Excuse my pronunciation. Can you tell me what caused the crater? Ra: the destruction of a fission reactor caused this crater. Questioner: whose reactor? Ra: this was what you may call a drone sent by the Confederation which malfunctioned. It was moved to an area where its destruction would not cause infringement upon the will of people. It was then detonated. Questioner: what was its purpose in coming here? Ra: it was a drone designed to listen to the various signals of your people. You were, at that time, beginning work in a more technical sphere. We were interested in determining the extent and the rapidity of your advances. This drone was powered by a single fission motor, or engine, as you would call it. It was not the type which you now know, but was very small. However, it has the same destructive effect upon third density molecular structures. Thus, as it malfunctioned, we felt it best to pick a place for its destruction rather than attempt to retrieve it, for the possibility, probability modes of this maneuver looked very, very minute. So trying to retrieve it, it just didn't, it was best to destroy. More difficult for them to try to retrieve. The questioner, was its danger both blast and radiation? Ra, there's very little radiation, as you know of it, in this particular type of device. There is radiation which is localized, but the localization is such that it does not drift with the winds, as does the emission of your somewhat primitive weapons. Questioner, I believe that an analysis of the trees in that area have shown a low radiation level. Is this the reason for such a low radiation level in the trees? Ra, this is correct. The amount of radiation is very localized. However, the energy which is released is powerful enough to cause difficulties. Then was the Confederation responsible for Earth receiving nuclear power? I haven't searched for this vehicle that they're describing, or not the vehicle because you wouldn't be able to see it, but the explosion, the site that the explosion happened, but I guess you can. And then Ra, it is a point which one cannot judge what is cause. The basic equation which preceded this work was an equation brought through by a wanderer dedicated to service to the planet. That this work should have become the foundation for instruments of destruction was not intended and was not given. The questioner, can you tell me who that wanderer was that brought through the equation? Ra, the information seems harmless, as this entity is no longer on your planet in third density. The entity was named Albert. I guess Albert Einstein. Questioner, thank you. Can you tell me who, before incarnation into this density, was the one known as Jesus of Nazareth? Ra, I have difficulty with this question as it is phrased. Can you discover another form of this query? Questioner, yes. What I meant to say was, can you tell me if Jesus of Nazareth came from the Confederation before incarnation here? Ra, the one known to you as Jesus did not have a name. This entity was a member of the fifth, which should be the fourth, density of the highest level of that sub-octave. He corrects it to fourth later, so I am correcting it now. This entity desired entering this planet in order to share the love vibration in as pure a manner as possible. Thus, this entity received permission to perform this mission. This entity was then a wanderer of no name, of Confederation origins, of fifth, which should be fourth density, representing the fifth/fourth density, understanding of the vibration of love. The questioner, did you say the fifth vibration was that of love? Fifth density was that of love? Ra, I made an error, the fourth density being that which we intended to say, the highest level of the fourth density going into the fifth. This entity could have gone on to the fifth, but chose to return to the third for this particular mission. This entity was of the highest sub-octave of the vibration of love. This is fourth density. The questioner, when I am communicating with you as Ra, are you at times an individualized entity, or am I speaking to the entire complex? And then Ra, you speak with Ra, there is no separation. You would call it a social memory complex, thus indicating manyness. To our understanding, you are speaking to an individualized portion of consciousness. Do I always speak to the same individualized portion of consciousness in each of the sessions? Ra, you speak to the same entity through a channel or instrument. This instrument is at times lower in vital energy. This will sometimes reduce our time together. However, this instrument has a great deal of faithfulness to the task and gives whatever it has to this task. They're speaking about Carla. Therefore, we may continue even when her energy is low. This is why we usually speak to the ending of the session due to our estimation of the instrument's levels of vital energy. I contemplated whether to remove that because I don't remove a lot of things, but that felt like we didn't really need to go into that. But at the same time, I thought, Carla did a phenomenal job channeling this work. And I thought it was good practice and a good opportunity to just recognize her in this moment for the amount of time and energy that was dedicated, the use of her vehicle to bring this information forward. So decided to leave it in there. The questioner. I would like to make a point clear now that I am sure of myself. People of this planet following any religion or no religion at all, or having intellectual knowledge of the law of one, or of anything at all, can still be harvested into the fourth density if they are that vibration. Is this not correct? Ra, this is correct. However, you will find few who are harvestable whose radiance does not cause others to be aware of their spirituality. Thus, it is not particularly probable that an entity would be completely unknown to his immediate acquaintances as an unusually radiant personality, even were this individual not caught up in any of the distortions of your so-called religious systems. It's kind of beautiful. When I think of being at the height of my first awakening, there was a good portion of that time where I really did not feel human. I won't go into that, but I really didn't feel human. But I could feel that whatever was going on with me, which I didn't understand intellectually at the time, I'm still learning about it. I've received a couple of ways to understand it, but I maybe have not fully accepted any intellectual understanding of it. And so ideas, I may use words, but fully accepting some intellectual understanding, I have not done. But at that time, I could feel that whatever was in me was impacting the people around me really positively. And I didn't always know. Sometimes months later, I would get a message that this is what happens every time we're together, or this is how our time together impacts them or affects them. But it was, from people who knew me before that awakening and after the awakening, so they could feel the difference in being around whatever energy was moving through me at the time. I find it really fascinating that even, if you don't try to look for people, you're not walking around in the world looking for people who are holding this higher light, but you just feel it when you're with them. You just feel that there is an energy here that is uplifting, that is calming, that is soothing, that is maybe even sometimes a little bit irritating, with regard to the triggering of unresolved stuff, depending on where you are in your journey at the time. I speak from experience as well, being triggered. Anyway, the questioner. When Jesus of Nazareth incarnated, was there an attempt by the Orion group to discredit him in some way? Ra, this is correct. Questioner. Can you tell me what the Orion group did in order to try to cause his downfall? Ra, we may describe in general what occurred. The technique was that of building upon other negatively oriented information. This information had been given by the one whom your peoples called Yahweh. This information involved many scriptures upon behavior and promised power of the third density, service to self nature. These two, they spoke a bit about this with Moses in the previous session. These two types of distortions were impressed upon those already oriented to think these thoughts. This eventually led to many challenges for Jesus. It eventually led to Judas, who believed that it was doing the appropriate thing in forcing upon Jesus the necessity for bringing in the third density planetary power distortion of ruling over others. This entity, Judas, felt that if pushed into a corner, this is what he was doing, trying to push Jesus into a corner, that Jesus would then be able to see the wisdom of using the power of intelligent infinity in order to rule over others. The one you call Judas was mistaken in this estimation of the reaction of the entity. Jesus, whose teach learning was not oriented towards this distortion. So it resulted in the destruction of his body. So Judas tried, Judas being influenced by Yahweh, and through Yahweh, Orion, the Orion group, tried to, get Jesus to use his access to intelligence infinity to basically serve the self, to serve them. And Judas thought that Jesus, might change his mind and do something different. But of course, Jesus didn't back down, and he carried his cross. So yeah, the questioner. Then if the entity Jesus was fourth density, and there are wanderers on the planet today who came from fifth and sixth density, what was it that Jesus did that enabled him to be such a good healer? And could these fifth and sixth density beings here today do the same thing? That's such a great question. Ra, those who heal may be of any density which has the consciousness of the spirit. This includes third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. The third density can be one in which healing takes place just as the others, which is great as well. It's like you don't need to be a higher density being in order to access these abilities to heal people. However, there is more illusory material to understand, to balance, to accept, and to move forward from. The gate to intelligent infinity can only be opened when an understanding of the instreamings of intelligent energy are opened unto the healer. These are the so-called natural laws of your local space-time continuum and its web of electromagnetic sources of in-streaming energy. It's a lot to navigate. I guess we're not always doing it. In fact, most of the time, not doing it consciously, realizing exactly what we're doing. We're just working with our chakras. We're just observing our thoughts. We're just questioning the belief or questioning the truth of the thought, And then as we're going through this process, we're doing what he described. It sounds so technical. Anyway, know then first the mind and the body. Know the mind and the body first, right? Then, as the spirit is integrated and synthesized, those are harmonized into a mind-body-spirit complex which can move among the dimensions and which can open the gateway to intelligence infinity, thus healing self by light and sharing that light with others. True healing is simply the radiance of the self causing an environment in which a catalyst may occur which initiates the recognition of self by self of the self-healing properties of the self. As I understand this, basically, each self is a different self, inverted commas. This individual self and that individual self and the greater self and the properties of this self and the healing of the questioner. How did Jesus learn this during his incarnation? Ra, this entity learned the ability by a natural kind of remembering at a very young age. Unfortunately, this entity first discovered his ability to penetrate intelligent infinity by becoming angry at a playmate. This entity was touched by the entity known as Jesus. So the playmate was touched by Jesus and was fatally wounded. Thus, the one known as Jesus became aware that within him there was a terrible potential. And he was determined from that point on to discover how to use the energy for good and not for negative. This entity was extremely positively polarized and remembered more than most wanderers do. So remembered more of who he really was. And then the questioner, how did this aggressive action against a playmate affect Jesus in his spiritual growth, and where did he go after his physical death? The entity you call Jesus was propelled to take action by this experience and began a lifetime of seeking and searching. This is why negative experiences matter. I really, I've on numerous occasions been down the path of, do we have to have so much suffering in order to awaken? Can't we be awoken by, or more often by experiences that spark our curiosity, scare the crap out of you, like an entity standing, a positively oriented entity standing in your room when you open your eyes at 2 a.m. How many people, if that happened to, would not seek some kind of answers? Or maybe you'd just be afraid for the rest of your life to go to sleep, and you sleep with the lights on. But I mean, for some, that would work. Like seeing a UFO. It's not a traumatic experience. But my biggest catalysts have been painful. In fact, dark nights, I can't even say that they were traumatic experiences, because the traumatic experiences came beforehand, but they did not catalyze a spiritual curiosity. It was the dark night bringing them all to the surface at the same time, pushing me toward finding a tool for survival that brought me to this path. You know what I mean? So yeah, pain is a great teacher. This entity studied, so Jesus studied first day and night in Judaism, and was learned enough to be a rabbi at a very young age. At the age of approximately 13 and a half, this entity left his family home and walked into many other places seeking further information. Can you imagine if we didn't have the internet at this point and people were going through spiritual awakenings and dark nights of the soul? I mean, the access to the information we have, and we don't even have to leave our couches, we're really, really lucky. This went on sporadically until the entity was approximately 25, at which time he returned to his family home and learned and practiced the art of his earthly father. When he became able to integrate and synthesize all experiences, he then began to speak to other people and learn what he felt during the preceding years to be of a worthwhile nature. He was then absolved karmically of the death of the child from his youth, when he was in his last portion of lifetime, and spoke upon what you would call a cross saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of action, or what you would call karma. Forgiveness is a big deal. I mentioned in a previous session, having to do the heart chakra meditation, and how difficult it was, because it required forgiveness of myself and of the people that had hurt me, and I couldn't do it. It was like I couldn't imagine putting the bags down. But that was what led to the experience of unconditional love. It's like forgiveness, was that kind of unlocking into higher consciousness, as well as into bringing more light into the world. Yeah, it's really not an easy ask. And also what it means to different people it doesn't mean, for example, allowing people to continue to treat you poorly. Can I just state? But anyway, moving along. The questioner. Then in which density does the entity known as Jesus now reside? Ra, he now studies the lessons of the wisdom vibration, the fifth density, also called the light vibration. The questioner, in our culture, there is a great saying that he will return. Can you tell me if this is planned? Ra, I'll attempt to sort out this question. It is difficult. Jesus became aware that he was not an entity of itself, but operated as a messenger of the one Creator, whom he saw as love. This entity was aware that this cycle was in its last portion, and spoke to the effect that those of its consciousness would return at the harvest. So when it's time for the harvest, those of a similar consciousness to Jesus would come again. Jesus as an entity is not to return except as a member of the Confederation, occasionally speaking through a channel. However, there are others of the identical congruency of consciousness that will welcome those to the fourth density. This is the meaning of the returning. Questioner. Can you tell me why the Earth will be fourth density positive instead of fourth density negative after the cycle is complete, since it seems there's a greater negative population? Ra, the Earth seems to be negative. That is due to the quiet horror which those positively oriented entities have toward the occurrences of your present time. In other words, what we are witnessing as positive entities. It seems really awful and it's horrific. However, those oriented and harvestable in the ways of service to others greatly outnumber those whose orientation towards service to self has become that of harvestable quality. So there are more people service to others that are ready to be harvested than service to self. Questioner, in other words, there will be fewer negative entities being harvested into fourth density than there will be positive. Is this correct? Ra, this is correct. The great majority of your people will repeat third density. The questioner, how did Taras Bulba, Genghis Khan, and Rasputin get harvested prior to the harvest? Ra, it is the right/privilege/duty of those opening consciously the gate of intelligent infinity to choose how they leave this density. Those of negative orientation who achieve this right or duty most often choose to move forward in their learned teaching of service to self. Questioner, is this the reason for what we call spontaneous combustion? Ra, this is not correct. Questioner, can you tell me what causes that phenomenon? Ra, picture a forest. One tree is struck by lightning, it burns. Lightning does not strike elsewhere. Elsewhere does not burn. They are random occurrences which do not have to do with the entity, but with the window phenomenon that they spoke. The questioner, are these particular entities all uniquely the same, or are they just random entities? Ra, they're random. Questioner, am I to understand that the harvest will occur in the year 2011, or will it be spread? Ra, this is an approximation. We have stated we have difficulty with your time space. So in other words, it could be, it could not be. This is an appropriate, probable, or possible time-space nexus for harvest. Those who are not in incarnation at the time will also be included in the harvest. That's interesting to know. Somehow I had a kind of a mild curiosity about that. What happens to those who are not on this physical earth anymore? Are they included? The questioner, well, I guess it would make sense after 75,000 years that not every soul would be incarnate at the time of harvest. Anyway, the questioner. Well, if an entity wants to be of service to others rather than service to self while he is in this third density, are there best ways of being of service to others, or is any way just as good as the other? Ra, the best way to be of service to others has been explicitly covered in previous material, but we will iterate briefly. The best way of service to others is the constant attempt to seek to share the love of the Creator as it is known to the inner self. This involves self-knowledge and the ability to open the self to the other self without hesitation. Oh, I think of my recent hesitation. This involves, shall we say, radiating that which is the essence or the heart or the mind-body-spirit of the mind-body-spirit complex. Speaking to the intention of your question, the best way for each seeker in third density to be of service to others is unique to that person. This means that the person must then seek within itself the intelligence of its own discernment as to the way it may best serve other selves. This will be different for each. There is no best. There is no generalization. Nothing is known. Questioner, in the book, and I will spell it again because I don't know how to pronounce it, OAHSPE. It states that if an individual goes over 50% service to others and is less than 50% for service to self, then he is harvestable. Is that correct? Ra, this is correct if the harvesting is to be for the positive fourth dimensional level. Questioner, what must be the entity's percentage if he is to be harvested for the negative? And then Ra, the entity who wishes to pursue the path of service to self must attain a grade of 5. That is 5% service to others, 95% service to self. This is why the harvest for service to self is so much smaller. It must approach totality. The negative path is quite difficult to attain harvestability upon and requires great dedication. I remember in one of Aaron Abke's videos, he talked about how impressed he was by the dedication of those who are able to be harvested to fourth density self-service, because of how dedicated they must be to this path of negativity and how much harder they have to work. The questioner, why is the negative path so much more difficult to attain harvestability upon than the positive? And then Ra, this is due to a distortion of the law of one that indicates that the gateway to intelligent infinity be a gateway at the end of a straight and narrow path. To attain 51% dedication to the welfare of other selves is as difficult as attaining a grade of 5% dedication to other selves. Isn't that quite interesting? Like, it's just as hard to be 51% dedicated to others than it is to be 5% dedicated to others. In other words, to keep lowering your percentage as opposed to raising your percentage. Yeah, that one's still, I need a moment for that to kind of sink in a little bit. It's not fully landing. But yeah, I'll leave it there. The questioner. Well then, if an entity is harvested into fourth density with a grade, let's say, of 51% for others, 49% for self, what level of the fourth density would he go into? I'm assuming there are different levels of the fourth density. Ra, that is correct. Each enters the sub-density which vibrates in accordance with the entity's understanding. The questioner. I've heard that there are 7 astral and 7 devachanic primary levels. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Devachanic. I haven't heard this word before. Is this correct? Ra, you speak of some of the more large distinctions in levels in your inner planes. That is correct. Questioner. Well, who inhabit the astral and who inhabit the devachanic planes? Ra, entities inhabit the different planes due to their vibrational nature. The astral plane varies from thought forms in the lower extremities to enlightened beings who become dedicated to teach learning in the higher astral planes. In the devachanic planes, as you call them, are those whose vibrations are even more close to the primal distortions of love light. Beyond these planes, there are others. Questioner. Our physical plane, are there 7 subplanes to what we call our physical plane? Ra, this is correct, and it is difficult to understand. This is fascinating to me. I guess maybe that's why they say, look at what's going on around you to get an indication of where your vibe is, like what's happening in your field. There are an infinite number of planes. In your particular space-time continuum, there are 7 subplanes of people. You will discover the vibrational nature of these 7 planes as you pass through your experiential distortions, meeting other selves of various levels, which correspond to the energy influx centers of the physical vehicle. So exactly what I just said. Wherever your vibe is, it's gonna be reflected to you in who you are associating with. The invisible or inner third density planes are inhabited by those who are not of body complex natures as yours. They don't have a chemical body, in other words, physical chemical body. Nevertheless, these entities are divided in what you may call an artificial dream within a dream into various levels. In the upper levels, the desire to communicate knowledge back down to the outer planes of existence becomes less. due to the intensive learned teaching which occurs upon these levels. I guess, once you've kind of unlocked a certain level, there may be a reason to come back, like, for example, people staying or souls remaining to help increase harvestability of others. But maybe it's kind of like you just don't see that stuff anymore. The questioner, when is it necessary to penetrate one plane? Then is it necessary to penetrate one plane at a time as we move from what we call third density physical through these planes? Ra, it has been our experience that some penetrate several planes at one time. This makes me think of like sudden awakening or a sudden Kundalini activation, where your body kind of goes nuts because it hasn't been prepared, as well as your psychology. Others penetrate them slower. Some, in eagerness, attempt to penetrate the higher planes before penetrating the energies of the so-called lower or more fundamental planes. This causes energy imbalance. You will find ill health, as you call this distortion, to frequently be the result of a subtle mismatch of energies in which some of the higher energy levels are being activated by the conscious attempts of the entity, while the entity has not penetrated the lower energy centers or sub-densities of this density. Questioner, is there a best way to meditate? Ra, no. Questioner, at this time, near the end of the cycle, how are reincarnations into the physical allocated on this planet? Ra, entities wishing to obtain critically needed experience in order to become harvestable are incarnated with priority over those who will, without too much probable possible doubt, need to re-experience this density. So in other words, if they can see that you are really close to obtaining harvestability, they will allow you to incarnate above somebody else who, it's not, they can see that the possibility of that is quite low. The questioner, how long has this been going on, this type of allocation? Ra, this has been going on since the first individual entity became conscious of its need to learn the lessons of this density. This was the beginning of what you may call a seniority by vibration. Questioner, can you explain what you mean by seniority by vibration? Ra, this will be the last question. The seniority by vibration is the preferential treatment, shall we say, which follows the ways of the law of one, which encourages harvestable individuals. So it's like if you're close to being harvested, they're going to prioritize you in allowing you to incarnate so that you can really try hard to cross that line. Each individual becoming aware of the time of harvest and the need on a self level to bend mind, body, and spirit toward the learned teaching of these lessons is given priority in order that this entity may have the best possible chance, shall we say, of succeeding in this attempt. And that brings us to the end of this session. Lots of interesting stuff in here as well. I think I need to stop recording these at night because I'm really sleepy in the past few recordings, which makes it a little more challenging to engage and be fully present intellectually, especially with how challenging this material is to navigate. But nonetheless, I hope you are receiving all that you need to, and wishing you a beautiful evening or day, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Much love.